Hello and welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Uncle Tom's Bungalow, released in 1937. It's the 165th in the series and it's directed by Tex Avery. This is also the fourth in the controversial Censored 11 series of cartoons. As such, there is no official release of these cartoons, and the person who did this scan is aware I'm using it, but he wishes to remain anonymous. Now, this is under copyright, so I can't show you the full cartoon here, and I'll give you a brief synopsis. So, after we're introduced to all the characters, a used slave trader sells Uncle Tom to two girls. After a while, the girls miss their slave payment. Yes, you heard that correctly. And so the slave trader wants his money back or Uncle Tom back, and we get a chase at the end. So first up, you're going to hear a re-edit of the original audio commentary I did before I had to take it down. In fact, this one was notorious in that I recorded a commentary, but it was never allowed to be released by Warner's for whatever reason. But anyway, so there's that, and then you'll hear some new thoughts from me. So grab some popcorn and, well, at least enjoy the history of this one. Weirdly enough, the first Censored 11 cartoon was hitting the trail to Hallelujah Land, which was also an Tom's Cabin adaptation, although extremely loosely. I mean, this one's actually a little bit more closer, as I understand, but then again, it's a short cartoon, so it's gonna take a lot of liberties, as is with a lot of the Tex Avery stuff. And weirdly enough, Tex Avery would do another adaptation over at MGM called Cabana. I will say, having a black girl and a white girl skipping along holding hands like that would be seen as progressive for the time. It really would. So I've got to give credit where credit's due. That's definitely not something that you would have seen a lot in those times. Now, one other bit of trivia that I found out was that this would have been around the time that Chuck Jones and Bob Clampett, who were in Tex Avery's unit as animators, they would have actually, around this time, maybe started off this cartoon, but they then would have gone off to iWorks to do those cartoons at iWorks Studio before. And the idea of the narrator is something that Tex Avery would do in quite a few of his cartoons. And recently he did it in The Village Smithy, which was also based off a story. In that case, it was more of a poem, and this one is an actual story. It's not a cartoon I think perhaps should be widely available as such. Like, I wouldn't want to see this on HBO Max. It's not really, I don't think it's really that appropriate. But for someone like me who looks at these things from a historical point of view, it'd be nice to have a better copy than this. So those are my original thoughts. So here are some new ones from me regarding this cartoon. And first of all, as I mentioned, this prominently has a narrator in the beginning, and Tex Avery dabbled in it in the previous cartoon, but here he goes all out and he completely wants to break that fourth wall. And after this cartoon, yeah, you'll see lots of spot gag cartoons, travelogue spoofs, that sort of stuff, where he'll use the narrator to a much greater effect. So this cartoon is important for that reason, that this is another stepping stone towards those Tex Avery cartoons that a lot of people know and love. Now, before I delve into the cartoon further, I think it's important to put this cartoon into context, so I'm going to now talk about the source novel itself, called Uncle Tom's Cabin. So first of all, the full title of the original novel was Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly. This was an anti-slavery novel, and it was written by Harriet Beecher. It was one of the best-selling books of the 19th century, and it actually helped fuel the abolitionist cause in the 1850s, leading up to, of course, the American Civil War. The book itself is about Uncle Tom, our main character, and about the people that he encounters along the way in various different little stories. And, of course, it involves a lot about the realities of slavery, as it is an anti-slavery novel. Before it was a book, it actually appeared in a newspaper as a 40-week serial, and eventually, yeah, it would end up being published as a book. Now, as you can imagine, given the time period that this book came out in, the reactions to this novel were quite varied, where you would have those in the north, and in fact, even in places like England, where the book was also released, the reactions were positive, but in the pro-slavery south, Well, you can imagine their reactions to such an anti-slavery book. In fact, there were even other books that went up against Uncle Tom's Cabin that were done in the same style, but ended up having a pro-slavery theme. But in the 20th century, the attitudes had, of course, changed, and now the Uncle Tom story is seen as being filled with a lot of poor stereotypes of African Americans. So while people can recognize its importance back in the 1800s in regards to the abolition movement, and there was definitely a sincerity by the author to do what was right, it still popularized those stereotypes. Now, some of these stereotypes includes characters such as, mammy characters, so, of course, older, perhaps cooks at plantations and things like that. Then you got the happy black person, the so-called happy darky, as they were referred to. You got the pickaninny stereotype, as is in this cartoon, in regards to black children, and you've got Uncle Tom himself, who's someone that seems to be more eager to please white people. So due to the lax copyright laws at the time, and the fact that the book eventually did go into the public domain in the late 1800s, you'd see a lot of what's known as Tom shows. So you would have shows that incorporated the melodrama of the book, and of course a lot of blackface, as you can imagine, unfortunately. And a lot of that was also as a response to the book. So some, of course, supported its anti-slavery, and then some, of course, didn't, so they would change things accordingly. But this would be something that a lot of people would have seen, and this only exaggerates even further the stereotypes that were contained within the actual novel itself. No doubt due to the fact that the book was in the public domain, there are numerous versions of Uncle Tom that were adapted to film, with the earliest one being done by Thomas Edison's production company in 1903. Perhaps the most famous one that people might be more or less aware of is the 1927 version that was 2 hours long at the time, but there were definitely many adaptations up until that movie was released. And then later on, there was really no feature-length film after that, which was quite interesting, but you would still have some cartoons referencing Uncle Tom. Of course, a lot of Warner Bros. Cartoons that referenced it, and there was even a Mickey Mouse cartoon called Mickey's Melodrama that parodies the Tom Show. So it's interesting to see here that Tex Avery chose to portray Uncle Tom as this old, frail man just walking around, as you can see on the screen here. So that may have just come across from one of the adaptions he may have seen younger when he was growing up in Texas. I don't know. That's, of course, speculation. But that just shows how varied all the different adaptions were, given the lax copyright initially, and of course with the material being in the public domain. Now onto the cartoon itself. So the reference here, the Simon Legree, has this pronounced Simon. That's based off of a French actress named Simone. So of course Avery must have had a thing for her, I don't know, but yeah, that's what it's referring to here. Now you'll see this reference in quite a few Warner Bros. Cartoons that came out in 1937.
Now, don't get excited. Don't get excited. Excited? I'm excited! I'm excited!
So that was from a very short-lived radio show called Community Sing, where you had Burt Gordon, who's on the right, and you got Tommy Mack on the left. But it was Tommy Mack, he played a character called Judge Hugo Straight, and he would just become flustered, and then, he would try to calm down, then he would burst out in anger, saying, excited? Who's excited? I'm not excited. And perhaps the most memorable reading of that line in a Warner Bros. Cartoon would be from Porky's Romance.
Don't get excited. Don't get excited. Excited! I'm excited! I'm not excited!
Plus we have some repeated animation from Tex Avery's own Milk and Money, which was released in 1936. Now, thanks to Keith Scott's Cartoon Voices books, and I have links below to those books, we now know who voices a lot of the characters in this one. So we, of course, have Ted Pierce, who was the narrator, and he was a writer at the Warner Brothers studio at the time. We have Billy Bletcher, who plays the villain Simon, and he also does one little voice of Little Ava, as you can hear here.
Little Eva, you dope!
But otherwise, Little Eva is actually played by Bernice Hansel. Elvira Ullman plays both Topsy and Liza. And just to show you how much misinformation is actually out there, Uncle Tom is not played by Tex Avery, but played by Roy Glenn. And also throughout the short, you'll hear the Basden Street Rhythm Boys and the Plantation Choir. So there you go. So what are the positives of this short? Because it's not all bad, thankfully. You've got Tex Avery, as I mentioned before, doing his breaking the fourth wall opening that he would end up doing in a few other cartoons. And you would see some gags in here that's just pure Tex Avery, which are actually quite funny. So a few examples include those hound dogs, those really lazy ones, where we get a nice little payoff at the end when the villain goes after the kids. And of course you got at the very end that Uncle Tom is in that really modern car, just completely breaking the entire short in terms of the actual setting that it's trying to portray. Plus, the use of the narrator is hilarious, like, of course, quick, he's coming, and he has to hide, and of course he hides where a southern soldier is. Now, instead of hearing the saying, my body might belong to you, but my soul belongs to God, here we hear,
my body might belong to you, but my soul belongs to Warner Brothers.
But for every good gag or great idea in this short, you've also got some horrific stuff like here, where, of course, he's just going to be whipping all his, well, slaves. And, of course, to make it even worse, this is like a used car dealership. So, yeah, it is what it is, unfortunately. Plus, of course, we've got the stereotype that all black people just love to gamble and they have their dice and all that stuff. So, yeah. So, in terms of the Censored 11, this one, I would say, is about middle of the road. It's interesting because I would compare this one to the film The Birth of a Nation, and if you haven't seen that one, I would argue it's an important film, but it's got some really bad parts to it. So it's got equally interesting technical innovations, and it's got some very bad bits. This one's similar. It's got some great innovations from Tex Avery moving forward, and this is definitely an important part of his evolution as a director. But on the other hand, well, you can see what you can see throughout this review. Ultimately, this one gets about a 4.5 out of 10 for me, based purely on Tex's evolution as a director, and some nice animation that you see, except for that hairy hand you can see in front. So that's another Censored 11 cartoon off the list, so thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care.
Boy, you're...